I have heard or read many times this famous sentence, "The music speaks for itself." It is true that all sorts of explanations could not convince you if you have not felt the beauty, the urgency of a piece of music. But a work of art is never born out of nothing. It is composed, written, painted at a certain time, within a certain society, at a certain moment in history. Of course, the music speaks for itself, but it speaks more forcefully, more in depth, if you know more about the language of the composer, what he wants to express, and how he wants to express it.
New York Times, 19th of January, 1913. Let me make a clean breast of my prejudices. I fear and dislike the music of Arnold Schoenberg. Now, the field being cleared, let us see what the music of the new man is like. The hardest musical nut to crack of his generation, and the shell very bitter in the mouth. Early December last, a curious composition by this composer was given in Berlin. A lady, attired in a modified Pierrot costume, stood before some Japanese screens and began to intone. To cantillate would be a better expression.
Den Wein, den man mit Augen trinkt, gießt nachts der Mond in Wogen nieder. Und eine Springflut überschwemmt den stillen Horizont.
The musicians were concealed behind the screens, but ach Gott, we heard them. We heard them all too clearly. The sound of delicate china shivering into 1,000 luminous fragments.
Mit einem fantastischen Licht erleuchtet der Mond die kristallenen Flakons auf dem schwarzen hochheiligen Waschtisch des schweigenden Dandys von Bergamo.
And harmonies that made the ears bleed, the eyes water, the scalp to freeze. Exquisitely horrible. Your nerves, and remember the porches of the ears are the gateways to the brain and ganglionic centers, are literally pinched, scraped. Of composers. He mingles with his music sharp daggers of white heat. He pares away thin slices of his victim's flesh. If this new music is so distractingly atrocious, what right has any listener to bother about Pierrot? How does Schoenberg pull off the trick? Well, not a question to be easily answered. But I felt, without clearly knowing the reason, that when the speaker so eloquently declaimed the lines,
Steig, o Mutter aller Schmerzen, auf den Altar meiner Verse.
the background of poignant noise was apposite and in the mood key of the poem.
Steig, o Mutter aller Schmerzen, auf den Altar meiner Verse.
When I surrendered myself, I followed the poems, loathing the music all the while. I recall one extraordinary moment at the close, a simple major chord. To my ears, a supernal beauty. After a treacherous sea of no harmonies, a firm field of ice under my feet. Perhaps the Hebraic strain in the composer's blood has endowed him with the gift of expressing sorrow and desolation and the abomination of living.
How one becomes lonely. Place of birth, Vienna, Austria, September 13th, 1874. Earliest memories, milkman downstairs. His first love, a horse. Water outside only. Bathtub, Saturday nights. His father's death, working in a bank, gave all he earned to his mother. The bank later went broke. I did not do anything but write music there. How I became a musician. How I became a Christian. How I became a Brahmsian. How I became a Wagnerian. As a composer, self-taught. But later, studied with Zemlinsky, Alex, the one person I could always turn to for advice. I married his sister. She said that she would kill herself if I did not marry her. 3 different men refused to be my best man. My friends were not happy about this marriage. I planned an opera. Superstition. Act 1. The living room of Maria, a student. Table, chairs, sofa, piano, bookshelves, pictures. Maria alone, putting the room in order. She takes a book from the shelf and sits. Conrad enters, a young poet. Maria welcomes him.
Hedwig is leaving for the summer. They're having a gathering at her place tomorrow. Will you be there?
How could I sit among those people, discussing abstract things, so distant to my soul, so foreign to my inner being? Instead of walking in the woods, sipping water from the spring, intoxicating myself with colors, sounds, rhythms, how can I talk about what's dead when life is all around? You taught me that.
I was not your teacher. I only roused you, and you awoke.
He walks to the piano. Act 2, a street, old houses, moonlight, a panorama changing constantly. Conrad and Maria walking towards the entrance to a park. Pergolas, alleyways, a lawn, benches, moonlight. Moonlight. Dear Herr Demo, I have read your poetry, and I cannot tell you how decisively it has influenced my music.
Two people walk through a bare, cold wood. The moon keeps pace with them and draws their gaze. She speaks.
I walk here in a state of sin. I have offended against myself. I have despaired, and yet I long for life.
Performance ended in a riot. Not only did members of the audience use their fist, but the critics also, instead of pens.
This piece is like a calf with 6 feet at a fairground.
An artist treated in this way becomes not only suspicious, but rebellious. I found myself at loggerheads with everyone. And so, I left Vienna for Berlin.
Berlin, residence of the German Emperor.
Seat of the imperial government.
3 million inhabitants.
The 3rd largest city in Europe.
Iron, machinery, locomotives, arms.
Textiles, furniture. Not a city, but a theater of shopping.
The typical Berliner is considered especially quick-witted, and, to mention something simply superficial, even a crossing of the Potsdamer Platz or a walk through the Friedrichstrasse in heavy traffic demands a presence of mind that finds ill-defined signals and indirectly perceived images sufficient.
We live in a nervous age, and that is why we need new forms of art. There's no time in Berlin for long and boring entertainments. We respond to the aphoristic, the terse, the catchy. Our motto shall be the cabaret from Paris. A small hall, 400 people.
Attached to a first-class restaurant.
And on the stage,
variety!
Dramatic scenes, pantomimes, marionettes, dialogues, and recitations.
The talent for recitation is deplorably rare in our German race.
But there are other races and half-breeds among us more talented in this respect.
Sie lassen einen nicht ruhig austrinken. Und ich habe das ehrliche Bedürfnis, dir heute einen kleinen Schwips beizubringen. Ach, mir ist so wohl heute. So wohlig. Ich möchte die ganze Welt umarmen. Natürlich mit einigen Ausnahmen. Auf ihr Wohl. Ja, sie ist mir gut. Ach, wie das schmeckt.
The night the Uberbrettel opened, a joyful wind was felt throughout Berlin.
Poems, sketches.
Kling, clang, Chloribusch, ringel-rangel, Rosenkranz.
Sturgelstiefel, Klipperklop.
And at the end of the performance, in a pantomime in which Pierrot commits suicide.
In the spring, I needed a new music director, and they brought me Arnold Schoenberg. young, totally unknown. He played me some little songs he'd written for the cabaret.
Fräulein Pigalette lud mich ein zum Tee. Ihre Toilette war gestimmt auf Schnee. Ganz wie Pierrette war sie angetan. Selbst ein Mönch, ich wette, sähe gegen Nette wohlgefällig an.
And I immediately engaged him.
Commercial tingle-tangle, devoid of all artistic interest.
And deliberately arousing sexual feelings.
The public has had it up to here with nonsense. The cabaret is nothing more than mass murder.
Why? Why have I failed? Do you not find it strange that my musicians belong without exception to the Semitic race? And that their talent for performance is only surpassed by their talent for commercial exploitation? I am like a father who has seen his favorite little daughter made drunk, seduced, and bartered by white slave traders.
I returned with wife and daughter to Vienna. Resumed private teaching of composition. In Vienna, I stood alone against a world of enemies. Alone, that is, with one exception. A small group of my faithful friends, my pupils.
Twice a week I'd wait for him on the Karlsplatz. Then we'd walk together through the town, 15, 30 minutes, until the city roar became inaudible behind his words.
The composer does not add to his music bit by bit as a child builds with wooden blocks. He conceives his entire composition as a spontaneous vision. A Michelangelo chiseled Moses out of marble.
When I first saw his chamber symphony, I thought, you too must write like that. You too must go beyond the furthest limits of tonality.
I was successful with my students, and so I was called
A seducer of the young, Arnold Schoenberg and his 12 apostles.
There is not a note in his music that is not thematic.
And such new possibilities of sound born from the inner expression of the music.
chords of the fourth. I do not think that any composer used such chords in quite this way before. New music is naturally more complex and more concentrated, and so there are obstacles. To overcome these, we need performances. But that remains impossible so long as concert performers only include the occasional new work as a curiosity or a monstrosity. To Ferruccio Bersoni, concert pianist and composer, many thanks for your kind letter. I have made copies of my piano pieces and am sending them to you today.
Herr Schoenberg, I received your pieces 5 days ago. I've studied them with the greatest care. I knew what to expect. A subjective, individual art based on emotion. However, I cannot overlook my impression as a pianist. Now, I believe your intentions are hindered by your music's excessive conciseness. As you might misunderstand me, let me show you. Here is what you write. This is orchestral, not piano writing. I would translate it thus.
Ingenious. Perhaps you are right. Nevertheless, it seems to me that what you are concerned with does not lie within the nature of my music. In art, when a new technique is established, the older virtues fall away.
Ich fühle Luft von anderem
I showed my music to Gustav Mahler, the great composer and conductor and director of the Imperial Opera in Vienna.
I've conducted the most difficult scores of Wagner, and I myself have written the most complex music on paper of 30 staves or more. And here is music of just 4 staves, and I cannot read it.
How one becomes lonely.
It was Zemlinsky who brought Schoenberg to our house the first time. After dinner, the 3 of them started talking about music. Then suddenly, an arrogant remark by Schoenberg, a lofty reprimand by Mahler, and a furious row. Schoenberg jumped up, ran out, Zemlinsky followed, shaking his head, and my husband raged.
Never let that conceited fellow into my house again.
But then, he began to miss the pair of them.
When will we see Tweedledee and Tweedledum come visit us again?
We went to a concert of their music.
Schoenberg's piece made an important and enormous impression on me.
The audience walked out in droves, banging doors and hissing, but his talent convinced us both. And when someone whistled on a door key, Mahler turned on him.
Listen! I do not understand his music, but he is young. And I believe he may be right.
I believed that now I had found my style of composing, and all the problems that had previously troubled me had been solved. I believed. It was a dream as lovely as it was disappointing. One day I fell upon some poems by Stefan Georg and was inspired to compose in a style different from anything I had ever written before. The critics shouted, "Revolution!" But I insisted. It is just a logical development of what went before. What use are explanations? What good can it do to tell a listener, this is beautiful, if the listener does not feel it?
Spricht nicht immer von dem Laub, wehendes Raub, von Zerschellen reifer Queten, von den Tritten, der Vernichter spät im Jahr, von dem Zittern der Libellen in Gewittern und der Lichter, deren Flimmer wandelbar.
I became afraid. I showed my music only to my closest friends. And I began to paint.
Yes, about 6 months ago he bought oils, canvas, and a brush, and now he is a painter?
Schoenberg is not a painter. He paints for entirely different reasons.
For me, painting was like making music, a way of expressing myself, presenting emotions, ideas, and other feelings.
In his paintings and in his music, Schoenberg understands. Our ears and eyes are not important in themselves, but because they are channels to our inner selves.
But these pictures are infuriating. Look at them. Completely amateurish. Green-eyed, watery bread rolls with that dreadful astral look. One recoils in horror.
Professor!
I received a letter from Kandinsky.
I heard your concert here in Munich, and your music has given me real pleasure. You, of course, do not know me or my paintings. However, you and I and our whole manner of thought and feeling have so much in common. I feel completely justified in expressing to you my empathy.
I thank you warmly. Your letter gave me extraordinary pleasure. And I'm especially happy when It is a fellow artist who finds points of contact with me. Perhaps you do not know, I also paint.
You spoke to me earlier about the possibility of an exhibition of your paintings in my gallery in Vienna.
Indeed, Herr Heller. And we agreed to the following. You organize the exhibition to open at the beginning of October. The duration will be 14 days. We agreed gross prices. Now, what is that? Oh, from which I give you 20% commission.
12 portraits of family and friends, 14 impressions of feelings. Visions. 3 self-portraits and 5 paintings of Gustav Mahler and his music.
I saw his pictures at the Heller Art Gallery. You know, he is unmistakably gifted. His pictures of people and landscapes are mere finger exercises.
Appalling! Seething, swirling, smeary, smudged, and daubed abominations.
But his intuitively conceived heads, his visions, show stirrings of the soul which cannot find musical form to come to expression.
I've been told by a certain stranger, who does not wish to be named, that he has purchased 3 of my paintings from the exhibition.
When Mahler and I left Vienna for New York, Schoenberg and Zemlinsky collected their pupils on the station platform. They were standing there when we arrived, hands full of flowers, eyes full of tears. Then they all got into our carriage and decorated it. The seats, the floor, everything.
We need you in Vienna. Please, do forgive me. I do not have medium feelings. For me, it is either or.
4 years later, when Mahler was dying, he spoke to me incessantly about Schoenberg. He told me, if I go, he will have no one. Who will help Schoenberg now?
Herr Schoenberg, I feel Mahler knows how much we grieve for him. Can you still feel the silence when his coffin was lowered into the earth?
Like a breath, wie ein Hauch.
Herr Schoenberg, I'm glad to be able to tell you something. Since yesterday, I know who the mysterious buyer of your pictures was. He didn't want you to know it, but now he has gone to eternal rest. Your pictures were bought by Gustav Mahler.
Gustav Mahler was a saint. Anyone who knew him, even slightly, must have had that feeling. You had only to see how this great man tied his tie to learn something of the processes and purposes of art. And now Mahler is not in Vienna, and the city barely exists for me. I want nothing more to do with it.
Dear friends, Schoenberg and his family plan to move again to Berlin. We, all of us, are trying to raise the necessary money to support him there. He will give lectures if we pay him. Will you help us?
Berlin! You cannot imagine how famous I am here. They know me everywhere. They recognize me from my pictures.
On Sundays, I often went with my brother to the quiet suburb of Zellendorf to meet with all the other Schoenberg pupils.
You must come with me, huh? Here in Zehlendorf. We are almost completely in the country and in the middle of the woods. And with a park close by.
There was always marvelous coffee and home-baked cakes. The composer dominated the conversation, so vital, full of inexhaustible ideas, an inspired teacher. I remember 2 children running through the room, laughing and playing.
Yes, while his wife sat on the sofa, small and sickly, shivering, wrapped in a shawl, and listening to every word he said.
Herr Schoenberg, yesterday I was in Munich, where I heard Das Lied von der Erde. For the first time since Mahler's death, there is a new work by him. None of us have ever heard such music.
And I was not there.
I came straight from Munich to Berlin to spend almost a whole day with you in Zehlendorf. I brought the piano score to play to you. Mahler's Das Lied von der Erde.
Gustav Mahler was among the greatest men and artists.
It was about 3 months afterwards, as I remember, that Schoenberg heard for the first time from a certain Frau Albertina Zehmer in Leipzig, an actress and a singer, and married to a wealthy lawyer. And for some reason, she was fascinated by the old Commedia dell'arte character of Pierrot.
Very fashionable in those days.
Well, and she'd found a most peculiar book of poems, Pierrot lunaire, written in French and translated into German.
As a matter of fact, I have read them in both languages, and they are equally bad in both.
I can imagine. And then she'd set out together with a piano player on a concert tour of small towns in Germany, declaiming these bizarre lyrics to the accompaniment of very feeble music.
And then she discovered Schoenberg.
25th of January, 1912. Frau Zehmer wants to commission me for 1,000 marks to write a series of recitations.
I do not sing these poems. I speak them lyrically. And my idea is to do so to the accompaniment of your music.
A marvelous idea, quite right for me.
Please remember that in lyrical speech, just as much as in the ancient art of song, there are leitmotifs and melody, but speech melody is much freer than strictly vocal melody, like a gentle shadow of it, and not so bound by iron rules.
March the 12th. Suddenly this morning, I had a great desire to compose. And for a long time now, I thought it possible that I'd never write again. There seemed so many reasons. My pupils snapping at my heels, trying to surpass me. My book on harmony. Theory dries one up. Now, I want to write music. And I know why. Spring is my best time. I feel things stir within me. Every year it's been the same. I'm like a plant. I've always written in the spring.
Pierrot, my laughter. Have I forgotten? The gleaming picture of the world dissolved.
Pierrot, mein Lachen, hab ich verlernt. Das Bild des Glanzes zerfloss.
I feel I am moving towards a new way of expression. I hear sounds becoming animalistic, an immediate expression of emotions that are sensual and spiritual. Follow exactly what I write. Gedicht, hissed, kläglich, pathetically. Be acutely aware of the difference between singing and speaking. Singing stays unalterably on pitch, while speaking rises and falls.
I shall never forget those weeks and months. Every few days, at 8 o'clock, the post would bring me manuscripts of a new piece of work. I rehearsed it feverishly on the piano. and then I would rush to Frau Zehmer's studio to undertake the difficult task of rehearsing it with her. 2 notes spoken, and the next 2 sung.
Auf dem schwarzen,
Then spoken again,
hochheiligen,
tonelessly whispered.
wasch dich
And again, spoken with tone.
des schweigenden Dandys von Bergamo.
April the 2nd. Der Dandy.
With a fantastic moonbeam.
Dr. Zehmer was a perfectly intelligent and artistic woman, but she was an actress, not a musician. I remember doubting I could show her the difference between 3/4 and 4/4 rhythms. So I asked her to dance a few bars of a waltz. And then a polka. With shorter and shorter intervals between the 2.
April the 17th. Moondrunk.
Den Wein, den man mit Augen trinkt, gießt nachts der Mond in Wogen nieder.
Remember, the written melody is not for singing except for specially marked exceptions. Your task is to transform it into speech melody, but of course still taking into account the given pitch.
Den Wein, den man mit Augen trinkt.
Be careful not to make it singing. At the same time, don't let it become naturalistic.
Tauben sanft und schlürft ihr den Wein, den man mit Augen trinkt.
It is never the performer's task to recreate the mood and character of a piece of music on the basis of meaning of the words. A musician should abstain from adding anything not intended by the composer. April 18th, the sick moon.
Nächtig todeskranker Mond. Dort auf des Himmels schwarzem dein Blick so fiebert übergroß, band mich die fremde Melodie.
Grant to this wretched moon cadaver thy pallid splendor in this dismal antechamber. Have you noticed? Your flute solo is actually a direct descendant of the mournful shepherd's pipe from Wagner's Tristan and Isolde.
In our rehearsals, and there were many of them, Schoenberg's magnetic personality was always seeking tension and inspiration. But then again, he also had his sense of humor. I well remember his attempts to get the speaker away from the expression of the tragic heroine. He stood behind her, and when the sick moon became too tearful,
Dein bleiches qualgebornes Blut.
Don't despair, Frau Zehmer. Don't despair. There is such a thing as life insurance.
Unächtig todeskranker Mond.
Frau Zehmer was completely clear about her commission.
Herr Schoenberg's accompaniment should be for piano and maybe 1 or 2 other instruments.
Schoenberg immediately chose a clarinet, and then a piccolo. But soon he was asking Frau Zehmer for a violin as well, and now his restless imagination was in flight. Why not cello? And then he realized he could alternate between piccolo and flute, violin with viola, clarinet with bass clarinet, and with all these different possibilities, orchestrate almost every number differently.
April the 18th, a pale laundry maid.
He even made me write down all the different possible combinations of these instruments. And I realized there were 30 of them.
April the 20th. You know, it's curious. Many of the forms which I supposedly was the first in history to use will be found to have been used by countless others long before me. My arrangement. Yes, I am Viennese. And yes, in Pierrot, there are several waltzes.
All my longing would be stilled if, as in a fairy tale, I could only scatter blissfully and gently on your brown hair, pale of flowers of moonlight.
Yet again, there is no heating in the house. For when I went to ask Matilda about it, she yelled at me. We have not spoken to one another since, and I have been angry with her all day.
Music of this kind is enervating and injurious to the nervous system. I observe many here in the audience showing the clearest signs of deep depression.
Well, I certainly know that I'll be miserable afterwards all afternoon.
Make way, you Philistines. Your last hour has come.
April the 25th. More waltzes. Now here's one I wrote 12 years ago. And here is one I wrote today.
I was lucky enough to attend all of Schoenberg's lectures in Berlin. You know, he never prepared, and he never stood on a platform or a podium. Instead, he walked up and down between the rows of seats, smoking constantly.
Composers of the Romantic period believed that music should express something. In this way, they were influenced by ideas from outside music. As a result, chords changed, and so did melodies, modulations, rhythms, and dynamics. The origins of these changes may be debated, but unquestionably they resulted in greater developments.
Short, bald, with a burning, restless look, Nervous gestures and a demonic passion even in calmer moments.
Lively as Quicksilver.
Like a little Chinese Buddha.
Or a figure from Hoffman's fairy tales, or the stories of Edgar Allan Poe.
Thus was the most paradoxical,
The most daring.
Most important of German modernists,
Arnold Schoenberg.
April the 26th, meanness.
Im blanken Kopf Cassanders, das entscheidend die Luft durchzetert.Urt, Pierrot, mit Heuchlerminen zärtlich einen Schellbohrer.
9 months ago, I finished my book on harmony. On the very first page, I wrote, "To the hallowed memory of Gustav Mahler." And on the next page, "This book have I learned from my pupils." In this study, which is like no other book on harmony, I have labored to show that what matters above all is not the solution, but the search. That is why the first task of the teacher is to shake the pupil, to create a tumult.
What kind of music is this? There is no melodic or harmonic line, only points, dots, dashes, phrases that sob and scream.
Away with harmony as cement or building blocks. Harmony must be expressed.
In this music, there are no themes.
And yet every acorn of a phrase is contrapuntally developed by an adept.
Counterpoint is the art of voice leading, and it is widely considered by our academic authorities mostly as a kind of science. But already in the works of J.S. Bach, many of the older laws and rules are denied. May the 4th.
Und blinkend.
If one voice in the music continuously imitates another voice using exactly the same intervals, canon is produced. Brahms wrote canons to amuse his friends, especially during their excursions into the forest of Vienna. He used to say,
If I do not feel like composing, I write counterpoint.
yes, but I say to write good counterpoint, we must work hand in hand with inspiration.
Kommend blinkend in ihren grauen Haar sitzt die Duenna Ormen im roten Röckchen da.
Oh, enough! The music-loving public will no longer tolerate contrapuntal curiosities and pointy-headed note combinations in place of melodies and simple, healthy music appreciation. If our musicians continue to deny the public what it demands, then the public will turn to vaudeville and operettas.
This is absurd. Everyone talks of Schoenberg as so modern, but when we went to hear Pierrot lunaire in Munich, we were rather disappointed. The whole affair is too strongly Viennese. Egon Schiele, Klimt, Schoenberg's own head with green eyes. We were interested, and a lot of it was good, but the element of sentimentality takes away one's confidence.
May the 5th, Heimweh. The old joke, love is homesickness.
What kind of music, I repeat, is this? that can paint the blackness of a prehistoric night.
The abysm of a morbid soul.
A crystal sigh.
Lieblich klagend, ein kristallnes Seufzen.
Heimweh, homesickness. It is true. All my life, a longing to return to older styles has been vigorous within me. And from time to time, I have yielded to that urge. May the 7th, Valse de Chopin.
Chopin!
Poor suffering Frederick.
For my music, one must have time. What I write is not a thing for people who have other obligations. At the same time, I compose at great speed. I once wrote 4 pieces of Pierrot lunaire in a single day. May the 9th, Nacht. Night, the Passacaglia. In a Passacaglia, beneath the free invention of the upper voices, there is always a fixed voice, a cantus firmus. Several of my pupils have also written Passacaglias, oftentimes good ones. Today, after his lesson with me, Webern and I took a walk along the woods together. He talked about his development and about mine.
Aus dem Qual verlorner Tiere statt ein Duft, Erinnerung mördet. Finstere, schwarze Riesenwolke töteten der Sonnenkreis.
And today I took another walk in the afternoon to Zehlendorf, and with Matilda. She goes out so rarely, I find that worth mentioning. A barcarolle. Song of a boatman of Italy. A moonbeam for a rudder, a water lily for a boat. Pierrot returns to Bergamo.
Mondstrahl ist das Ruder.
when Schoenberg talks, he displays such knowledge of music history.
I have never read a history of music.
Yet he never mentions his own compositions, and he never speaks a word of criticism against the masters of the past.
Take J.S. Bach. There is no greater perfection in the art of music than Bach. Neither Beethoven nor Mozart attained perfection such as this. But the perfection of Bach does not result in a style which can be imitated. Bach's perfection is one of idea and of conception. Pretty story. I recently revisited Vienna, and as I have no home there anymore, I stayed in a hotel where the elevator boy asked whether it was I who had composed Pierrot lunaire.
Of course! In those days, there was hardly a city in Europe where the drive towards cultural ideals was as passionate as in Vienna.
He said that he had heard it nearly 20 years ago at the first performance. And he still had the sound of it in his ears, particularly in one place where there was a mention of red jewels. In fact, the jewels were rubies, red and princely rubies, bloody drops of ancient glory. Sleeping in death caskets, down in grave vaults.
Herr Schoenberg.
Yes.
When I myself was writing what is perhaps one of the shortest pieces that have been in music up till now, I noticed that when all 12 notes of the chromatic scale had been played, I had the feeling that the piece was over.
Music should be brief, concise, in 2 notes, not built, but expressed. A novel in a single gesture, joy in a breath.
The greatest artists are those who make everything from nothing.
We live in a nervous age. We respond to the aphoristic, the terse, the catchy.
Dear Herr Krauss, I'm sending some aphorisms I have written for publication in your magazine.
They interest me, but I cannot possibly publish them. Instead, I will discuss them with you face to face, and soon, perhaps at the Café Imperial some afternoon.
Dearest Matilda, yesterday I went out big time on the town. 3 hours in the Gassenhäufel, an evening meal with Alex at the Pilznitzer, then with Alex and Berg to the Arkaden Café, and finally with Oppenheimer in the American bar till 1 o'clock in the morning.
Aphorisms!
An aphorism never coincides with the truth.
It is either a half-truth or a 1.5 truth.
What the good aphorist must really know is how to hate.
Well, one thing is certain, an aphorism is never for publication, and an aphorism certainly cannot be dictated to a typist. It would take too long.
A melody is like an aphorism. Both move rapidly from problem to solution. May the 12th, Gallows Song.
Die Dirne mit langem Halse wird seine letzte Geliebte sein. In dem Hirn steckt wie ein Nagel. Die Dirne mit langem Halse steckt wie ein Hühner am Hals zu zücken.
This was a time of the extremest intellectual tension in Austria and in Germany. A new art was emerging, but the old protested and refused to give up without a fight.
There is Impressionism and there is Expressionism. The Impressionist is a mere bourgeois. He is nothing but an ear, and he has no mouth. He listens to the world, but he does not breathe upon it. The Expressionist tears humanity's mouth wide open, sounding the tocsin of alarm, the spirit's answer.
I painted Schoenberg's portrait, and as I worked, he paced around my empty studio, one shoulder pushed forward as if he were bracing himself against the world.
When I compose, I make decisions only according to feeling. Every chord I write corresponds to a necessity, the urge to express myself.
The whole nature of our epoch is multiplicity and indeterminacy. Das Gleitende, we call it, slipping, sliding, gliding.
May 28th, the moon spot. In this movement, I can hear a double canon cancresans between piccolo and clarinet on the one hand, and violin and cello on the other.
No, a fugue between piccolo and clarinet, and a canon between violin and cello.
It appears that everything nowadays is falling into separate, different parts.
Those parts themselves are falling into yet more parts.
Nothing allows itself to be embraced anymore by concepts.
It's true. None of us seems able any longer to distinguish between what is above and what is below, between what is moving forwards and what is moving backwards.
None of us can have only one sensation at a time. Each of us has thousands simultaneously. And this ceaseless variegation, this multifariousness, this illogicality which our senses demonstrate is what I look for in my music.
Schoenberg, I came straight from Munich to Berlin to spend almost the whole day with you in Zellendorf. I brought the piano score, Mahler's Das Lied von der Erde. Ich spüre eines feinen Windes Hauch. I sense the breath of a delicate breeze. Thus Mahler, and thus Schoenberg. Ich fühle Luft von anderen Planeten. I feel air from another planet.
May the 30th, 1912. The final poem. 21. 3 times 7. Superstition. And every poem is divided into 3.
Alter Duft aus Märchenzeit, die Rausch ist wieder meine Sinne.
Music should be an expression of feeling, as our feelings, which bring us into contact with our unconscious, really are.
Alter Duft aus Märchenzeit, berausch es wieder mich.
Thus Mahler. Everywhere the beloved earth blooms in spring and once more turns green. Everywhere, forever blue lie the horizons.
And thus Schoenberg. Now from my sun-framed window I look out at the beloved world and dream on into blessed distances